All right, so I decided to finish out this 2020 year with just going over our homework assignment that was 3.1 functions day 5. And then we'll get back into the local max and mins starting next January 4th when we come back. So looking at this one, number 49, we need to determine the domain of the function according to the domain convention. So we talked about there are certain things that will restrict a domain, one of which is dividing by a 0. The other one is when we start looking at square roots, because we can't take the square root of a negative number. So here, for this example, we are looking at the square root, or I'm sorry, the absolute value of u divided by u, so that whenever I look at this, I can't divide by a 0. So my domain is going to be from negative infinity to 0, which doesn't include 0, and from 0 to infinity. The other way I could say this is my domain is x not equal to 0, so that the domain is absolutely everything except 0. All right, looking at number 50. So first I need to figure out what would I put in the bottom that would give me a 0. So I can set the bottom equal to 0. And if I add the 1 over, it gives me x squared equals 1. That's a 2 up here. Take the square root of both sides. And that gives me x equals plus and minus 1. So in other words, x can either be a positive 1 or a negative 1. If I look up top, I can't end up with a negative. So I can't have anything where x would be less than 1. So I can set this equal to 0 as well. X minus 1 equals 0. And x equals 1 is the first value that it can be allowed. It'd be even easier if I set this to x greater than or equal to 0. Or x minus 1 greater than or equal to 0. Saying that everything in here has to be greater than or equal to 0. I find that x has to be greater than or equal to 1. So that gets rid of my negative 1 in the bottom, because it can't be a negative. It can only be a positive 1 or bigger. And then this one says that it cannot be a positive 1 because that would give us a 0 in the denominator. So our domain would be from 1 to infinity without including 1. So that's why it's a parenthesis. Another way you could do that was domain is x greater than 1. It cannot be equal to 1 now. Number 53. So for this one, my denominator is all this. So the easiest way to do this is to factor that out and then set it equal to 0. So that I get u minus 3 and u plus 2. And set each one of those equal to 0. That's going to give you u cannot equal 3 and u cannot equal negative 2. So that's my domain. Domain is u not equal to 3 or negative 2. I can do that a little better. Apparently not. Number 54. Again, this cannot be less than 0, so I'm going to do 4 minus t squared has to be greater than or equal to 0. First thing I do is subtract the 4 over. It gives me negative t squared greater than or equal to negative 4. Divide both sides by negative 1. Now when I divide by the -1, it flips my inequality. Take the square root, and you get t less than or equal to 2 and greater than or equal to -2. So in other words, if I put any number between -2 and 2 in, this would work. And my domain would either be, you can do inclusive, so bracket, -2 and 2, bracket. All right. In 57 to 62, find the following. We only had to do 60 and 61. So for 60, if I plug a 0 in, 0 is going to go into the top equation because it works for this interval. So A would be 5. 0 plus 5. Part B is 1.6. And 1.6 is between 0 and 5. So I would just do 3 times 1.6. Don't know that off the top of my head. So 4.8. C is -2.3. So it would plug in to the top one. So -2.3 plus 5, or 5 minus 2.3. That's going to give me 2.7. And then up here I have 5 minus 2 pi. Pi is 3.14. So 5 minus 2 times 3.14 would be 6.28. So it would be -1.28 that I'm plugging in. That would go into this equation. -1.28 plus 5 gives me 3.82. I'm sorry, 3.72. And that's it for that one. Number 61. For A, it's 0, so it's going into this one because 0 is between -1 and 2, which means I plug it into this equation. Absolute value of 0 is 0. 0 minus 5 is -5. Then we plug in 1.6. It would go in between here as well. 1.6 is between -1 and 2. So it would be 1.6 minus 5, which would give us -3.4. Next is the -2.3. That would go into this one because -2.3 is less than -1. So we're going 2 times -2.3. That's -4.6 minus 3. That's -7.6. Lastly is part D. So we said this is about -1.28. So that would go into here as well. 2 times -1.28 would give me -2.56. Minus 3 would give me -5.56. All right, well, that is it for today. If you have any questions, please feel free to contact me over break. If you have any concerns or you just want to learn math over break, take a break. Anyways, I hope you guys have good holidays, and we will see you when we come back on January 4th.